struggle is real. So you bought yourself a reflector hoping to increase your production quality, just to realize that you can't actually use it because you don't have an assistant. So now, what? If this has been bugging you for a while now, you stick to the end because this video is going to give you some new perspective on not just the reflector, but on photography in general. Hello photographer, welcome back to my channel. It's Belinda and this is where we talk all about photography. We talk about inspiration, camera techniques, as well as editing skills so that you could take better photos. In this video, I am going to walk you through how I use my reflector without an assistant. I'm also going to give you my opinion on whether or not you actually need a reflector, because this is a question that a lot of budding photographers who want to go pro will have. I will then walk you through two main ways I have personally used to fix my reflector at where I wanted to be in my shoots. I'll then go through briefly the pros and cons of both methods. If you're new to this channel, hit like, subscribe, hit the bell as well, because this would help my channel grow massively. Without further ado, let's dive right in. Do you actually need a reflector? Yes, you totally need one. This is a rather uncomfortable situation for most photographers to be in, because you're used to be shooting just with your own camera using natural light without any modifiers. However, now you realize that something must be done in order to improve your photography, which is in this case adding a reflector and learning how to use it. But this is quite a big leap from where you were at, and so it's totally human nature to experience this inertia, hoping to get away with not using a reflector, thinking excuses and doubting your decision to buy a reflector in the very first place. But in order to truly grow in your photography, this is a step that you must go through, which is to learn how to use a reflector, even if that means you will have to be a one-man band and be your own assistant. Based on my experience, there are two reasons why you should totally get a reflector. First of all, in relation to the quality of your photos, it's going to fill up the shadows in your photos and therefore retain more details, and that is going to up your production quality. Secondly, getting a reflector gets you started in learning about lighting. As you learn how to operate a reflector, you're actually learning about light. You're studying the directional nature of light. You're learning about how different lighting techniques can affect the mood of your subject, which is a very important step if you want to learn about artificial lighting. So these are the two main reasons why getting yourself a reflector is such a worthy investment if you are serious about your photography in the long run. So if you're still debating within yourself whether or not you should get a reflector, or if you're stuck in a position where you kind of acknowledge the benefits of using a reflector while feeling trapped because you don't really know how to, my take on this is that everything seems impossible until it's done. So here are two ways how I personally use a reflector without an assistant on set. The first method is something really basic, which is holding a reflector on your one hand and shooting with the other. This idea might not sound very convincing to you because you might think that you are too far away from your model, or that your angle might not be accurate enough to make a difference on your photo. However, I assure you that the reflector is way more powerful than you think. While these are legit concerns, it is still way better to have a reflector to reflect some light back onto the shadows versus having none at all. Therefore, the fact that you can't get it 100% perfect is no justification for slacking and not using a reflector at all. It's about making the most out of what you already have and being resourceful as a starting photographer. So here are a few things you can pay attention to, which would make your life easier in filling up the shadows as you hold a reflector yourself. In relation to the size of the reflector, I would recommend you to go for a larger one, for the simple reason that a larger reflector can reflect more light back onto your subject. If you're holding the reflector yourself, there will be limitations as to how close the reflector can get in relation to your model. There will be also some limitations as to the angle of reflection, because the reflector will have to be at a certain position relative to the model. Now, if you have a larger reflector, the margin of error can be wider. You can get away with an angle that's slightly off, and you can also manage to fill in the shadows to a substantial extent, even if you're quite far away from your model. So in order to make your life easier, go for a larger reflector. Another tip I have for you is to start experimenting this way of operating a reflector when you're shooting on a relatively lightweight lens. For example, as I experimented with this method on myself, I was shooting with a Nifty 50, which is a really lightweight lens that I could operate on one hand with no difficulty, and therefore this could be a good place to start if you are worried about not being able to control camera shake and having blurry images because you are suddenly taking off half of the support you otherwise would have on your camera. Along similar lines, shoot with lenses that are wider, for instance anything below 50 millimeters, so that this allows you to be closer to your model, which means that your reflector will also be closer to the model. As I tilt my reflector on one hand, I would then look through my viewfinder so I could find the best angle for my reflector to be positioned at, which fills up the shadows most effectively. The biggest perks of this method of holding your own reflector is that it takes up no extra space as compared to other methods where you have to set up light stand. Because of the way light stands are designed, it's going to take up way more space than just holding up a reflector. Secondly, holding the reflector on your own gives you way more flexibility in adjusting the angles and the position, because you can literally just move the reflector in between shots real time if you see that something's not right in the viewfinder. Whereas you have your reflector fixed on a light stand, you will have to get out of your way, move the light stand, come back and try out a few things before you actually arrive at the optimal angle that you're looking for. And apparently you don't have extra costs. You won't need to pay for a light stand and also the clamp which holds the reflector in place on the light stand. The cons though is that it can be extremely tiring because you will have to support the weight of your camera on one hand, and you will have to bend your body probably to get the right angle for the reflector. This could be both physically and mentally very exhausting, and also, as we mentioned earlier, you will experience some limitation on the positioning of your reflector. The second way of operating a reflector without an assistant is to make use of the objects that you find on set. For me, because I shoot a lot of portraits on streets, there are a lot of things on streets that I can make use of. For instance, I can simply rest my reflector on the walls, on fences, on literally any random thing I see on streets. Even if you're not shooting on streets, you might be shooting in locations where there are just a lot of things. In general, things that are heavy enough to fix the reflector in place. You have to get creative and to make use of what you have on location, but I can promise you it totally works. Well, I'll just show you how I'm using a reflector right now. Basically, I have hidden my reflector here. I didn't have a light stand and I am fixing one end of my reflector with my camera bag, which has some gear in it that's heavy enough. And on the other hand, I had this door which kind of pressed the reflector back onto the wall, supported by my bag, which is also very heavy. Yeah, that's a perfect example of how you can make use of your surroundings. You know, it works just fine. For some more examples, I've actually used potted plants, sandbags I've found on shooting locations that worked perfectly well. A point to note though is that this would work best if you're shooting on a day without much wind. A reflector is a really thin piece of material. The wind can totally tilt the reflector away from where you want it to be and even just blow it away. You would want to make sure that the day you're shooting on is not that windy. Using a reflector with the aid of the objects that you find in the scene means that you don't have to pay extra money to buy light stands and clamps to hold your reflector. It's also likely going to take up less space than otherwise. An added perk is that apparently you free up your second hand, which means that you will be able to operate your camera with both hands, which most photographers would feel more comfortable with. And depending on what is on set, you can actually find quite a lot of interesting angles to put your reflector. In some circumstances, this method can be even more versatile than setting up a light stand. The apparent con is that you really never know until you are on set. You don't really know what exactly is at the location, and therefore there is a large element of unpredictability involved. And secondly, also, it doesn't quite work if you're shooting outdoors on windy days because it will be harder to fix a reflector just using what you have on set. It certainly is going to be more challenging to operate a reflector without an assistant, but I want you to know that it's not impossible, and therefore the fact that you don't have an assistant should not be a justification for why you're not using a reflector, because you should be doing anything to make your photos better, even if that means doing something really hard. Honestly, we developed this impression that the reflector must be used by an assistant because we see a lot of established photographers hire assistants to hold the reflector for them, when in fact we overlook the days when they were starting, when they didn't have the budget to hire an assistant, and they probably just did the same. There's no point in comparing your situation with that of another person who is already very established and has been in the industry for 10 and 20 years. I hope this video has been helpful in giving you some highly doable methods of using the reflector when you don't have an assistant, and also put into perspective how photographers actually start their careers. If you want to revisit some of the points that I've made in this video, feel free to head over to my blog, in which I put down what I've said in greater detail using clearly formatted sections. If you also happen to be interested in portraiture, head over to my Instagram where I give up simple and easy to follow tips in my captions. If you enjoyed the content that I have been making, hit like, subscribe, hit the bell as well because this helps to support my YouTube channel massively. Thanks for watching and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!